All right, hi everybody. Today is Tuesday, May 11th, and this is my broadcast. There's got to kind of have a lot to go through, so I try to make this little schedule for myself. I'm going to go over the announcement for the week, talk about the discussion guidelines in general real quick. I'm going to go over a counter argument. I made a super creative PowerPoint that I put in discussions. I dropped in discussions a moment ago. So I'll go over a counter argument, go over that PowerPoint, and then I have some things to say about the main assignment. So these first 2 weeks are kind of heavy because you're A, picking a subject, and then B, you're literally structuring the argument of it. And then you'll find information and so on. So this part, though, kind of heavy lifting. So I'll go over the thesis statement, finding main reasons or main supports, and then an introduction paragraph. That's the plan. Okay. Announcements. All right, week 2, here we go. So the to-do list, we have the grammar self-check. So this week is about run-on sentences, right? Sentences that putting two independent clauses, which are complete sentences, together without punctuation. So you do that, and your grammar's better, and everybody's happy. Okay, the textbook reading is there. So the lesson this week is going to be about pre-writing, a little bit like of outlining, but it's trying to, the techniques that they're going to go over are things that are trying to help you figure out, first of all, sort of your main argument, and then the main supporting arguments that eventually, these things are all subject to change, right? So they're just trying to do something. So they do a brainstorming exercise, just to try to get you to write down as much as you possibly can. And any of those things, you should really let yourself write whatever, right? Not like criticize, be like, should I put that down, or don't just put anything down. If it makes sense, if it doesn't make sense, whatever. That's sort of what the brainstorming's about, breaking through your critic. So that's the discussion, right, is basically focusing on this counter argument idea, where you find an argument that's actually against you and how you deal with that. Okay, so you can read all of those things. The other thing I was just going to mention, since we've had 1 week for discussion board, right? And people did really well, so I'm just going to go over this just as, so what I posted here in the announcements are the rubric, right, for all discussions, and the outstanding, so to receive all the points in each of the sections, basically. So you have content, which is you address all of the discussion questions and all the points, and you put experience and knowledge and understanding, you do all of that. Evidence and sources, so this means you want to do this, and I'm not sure that they make this clear, but it's clear right now. So you want to use evidence and quote, basically, or paraphrase if you want, but also include the citations from the lesson, from a textbook reading, one of those two, and they want you to find an article, a scholarly outside article using probably the library. So you want to have 2 sources for every discussion if you want to get full credit for all of that. So a lot of people put one thing, right? So just I quoted the reading, or I quoted the textbook, or I quoted a scholarly source. You want to have 2. You want one outside source and one from something inside the course. The follow-up means you want to put some effort into this if you want the full credit, right? Because it means that you're, rather than just commenting on what somebody's saying, you're sort of taking one of their ideas that they expressed and building on it, right? Developing it more, pushing it. It doesn't mean that you have to, like, you're not there to just agree or disagree, really. You're sort of there to be like, yes, I see the issue. Like, you point out, I see this could be the issue in this argument, and in my mind, this would develop this way. So you're trying to add to it. That's the main thing. Professional communication, that's the grammar part. They want you to be practicing, like, correct academic writing. So no phrases. You're trying to put everything in complete sentences, paragraphs. Sometimes, usually they ask for paragraphs. So you want to make sure you're doing paragraphs. So that's what that is, errors. And then frequency of response, literally just post on 2 different days. Then, okay, so here's the idea in a counter argument in an essay. It has 3 stages, okay? See, that's how they moved. Okay, so stage 1 is this. You introduce a criticism, something that is opposed to the point you are making, right? So if I'm saying we should legalize marijuana, I'm now thinking what someone on the other side would say to me. They would say, you shouldn't legalize marijuana because it's a gateway drug and leads to all sorts of drugs, whichever, right? So I'm trying to think of the other side. Stage 2 is I want to find a way to agree with some part of it, right? I want to find some sort of common idea that I can say, yep, I agree with that. And then the stage 3 is I go, but, and then I reaffirm my actual argument. So what this does is it strengthens your overall argument, and it shows that you know what you're talking about because you've thought about the other side and you're ready to sort of deal with their objections. So I say there are some people who believe that we should not legalize marijuana because it is a gateway drug. It will lead to harder drugs, and you'll have more severe drug abusers or more people addicted to hard drugs. I could say something like, while it's absolutely true that we do not want to increase the number of people who are using or who become addicted to hard drugs, there's no actual scientific proof that blah, 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 whatever information I have. That's the whole game for counter argument. So stage 1, you introduce a criticism that's opposed to the point you're making. And these are just some possibilities. Like, so you're saying something, so maybe someone could draw a different conclusion, or maybe one of your assumptions, they think it's not quite right, or your evidence is not great. You're just trying to see the opposite of your view. And this is where you'll know whether you have an arguable question, because you need to have an arguable issue, because you need to be able to see the other side. The other side needs to have actual legitimate arguments. So that way, then you can make your argument stronger. So you introduce criticism, then you try to find a way, some aspect of it that you can agree with. And almost always there is, because whatever the concern is, you can agree with the concern. Nobody's like, I want marijuana legalized because I think we need more people addicted to hard drugs, right? No one's doing that. Everybody's like, yep, we all want to prevent this, but, and so on. So a couple of examples I just wrote out, right? Like, while it makes sense to question whether or not, and then I can put some common idea here, it is clear that, and then I reaffirm my position, right? I mean, this is in one sentence, you can do it in that. But this is where you're trying to just focus on some aspect that you can agree with. This is the language that you sort of use when you bring in this subject, or you bring in the opposite topic, right? So one might object here that, so I'm going to present their side, and then I'm going to do my little thing. Or it might seem to some like, or it's true that, or of course, all of this stuff. And then sometimes questions, you can do that too, but I don't particularly like the questions. I think I just don't like starting questions with but, something I learned in grammar school and I can't get over. So anyway, so you introduce their side, and then as briefly and clearly as you can, you sort of explain their side, right? And then you turn. You explain their idea, and then you basically are like, yeah, but here's why you're wrong. So you're using reason, you're using logic, you're using also research. So if I can say, while I agree we don't want more people addicted to hard drugs, there's no scientific evidence that links marijuana to hard drugs, and here is a study that was done in blah, 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 and here's information, blah. So if I can find information, that's the best way to deal with the counter argument. And then these are other little strategies. I just always try to promote the research strategy. This is a little quick review thing, right? So the counter argument is a viewpoint that opposes your main argument, and you give a fair and accurate representation of it, right? You don't want to be like, the other side wants to kill people for no reason. It's like, that's not how you do it. You want a legitimate argument when you're talking about the other side. And then you have a direct response refuting that, meaning actually, and then the thing I put in there, right, is that little bit of agreement part. So they say this, they're right about this part, but my argument stands still. Where to put it? So what we're going to try to do is I'm going to try to get people to have everything in threes. Eventually, you'll have three supporting arguments, which means potentially there are three counter arguments, right? Because you will make an argument about your subject, then you will do some people say, and then you'll bring up the other side, and then you'll counter that. But this is where it can go. Some people start, you can put it in it doesn't always work like that, right? In argument essays, it's not always like, here's my argument, here's what someone else would say and why they're wrong. Here's my second part, here's what someone else would say and why they're wrong. Sometimes it's not as easy. So there are people who start off the introduction with just a counter argument. Like they just start with it and they're basically counter arguing right away. So there's different, it depends on your subject, but these are some suggestions you should look over just to see, where it can go. Okay, so that's the counter argument, the discussion part. Statements, writing an introduction, hooks, which are part of an introduction, and then the counter argument. These are all parts of things we're dealing with this week. I'm telling you, it's a heavy load. So this is going to be what you download from week 2. It's a template, right? It looks like this. Again, it's set up so you have the APA formatting already there, and you're just going to basically fill in different things. You've got a thesis statement you're trying to come up with. Here's one like little hint or trick that I would do. I wouldn't do the thesis statement first. I would do the other things first, and then come back and fill in the thesis statement. It's very rare that people's minds like grab a hold of and make a clear argument that's a thesis statement, and then they just develop it out. Usually, they're figuring out what the issue's about, what the arguments are, and then they're sort of getting to that, and then they're coming up with the 3, and then they're like, oh, so my thesis would be this thing, right? Because your thesis is just introducing what you're going to talk about. So anyway, that would be my suggestion, is that you don't need to do this first, you do this stuff first. The pre-writing, this is where you're brainstorming. You're also trying to come up with, so 3 reasons that for your side, basically 3 opposing reasons, which would be, arguments, which you would turn into counter arguments eventually, and then introductory paragraphs, right? Trying to get that going for your essay. And then tentative sources. They want you to have completely scholarly sources, which means the best case is you go and you find academic journals from the library. And if you want, I might do a mini thing on that, like just a mini video about that real quick. Later, obviously. But they want you to create a list of at least 4 sources, right? So that's part of this. So again, you're just filling in the template and turning it in like this. You're not turning it into an essay or anything. You're just asked to fill out. Again, I would wait, do the thesis later. It's just a little hint idea. So effective thesis statements. So here's the thing. So the thesis statement is you are making an argument. You're proposing something. You are asserting something. And it's right, the main idea of the entire essay. So mine could be, if I'm doing the marijuana example, which has been done to death, but let's say like marijuana should be legalized. That's my position because it has health benefits, it will help the economy, and it will reduce crime. I'll pretend that I looked up stuff and know it, but that's essentially the thesis statement. You're making an assertion of how something should be, and then you're trying to figure out what your 3 main parts of your essay are going to be. Oh, this is cute. Look what I did. Okay, so effective thesis statement is the main idea of the essay, suggests a topic for each body paragraph. That's what I was saying. Commonly has 3 parts. So this is for a traditional 5-paragraph essay. This paper is supposed to be 8 pages, I think, or 6 to 8, I believe. So we're not necessarily doing traditional 5-paragraph essays. And I'll show you how we'll do more paragraphs later on. But it is true that you want 3 main arguments, 3 main ideas, right? So I'm going to do my first one about how marijuana has health benefits, and I'll talk about how it helps people and chemo, and I'll do the whole thing about health and all the medicinal properties that it has. I'll probably need 2 paragraphs to do that, maybe 3, depends if I have a good example I want to introduce and talk about. My second subject will be it'll help the economy, and I'll talk about the different ways and prove that it'll help the economy. probably another 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then my third one will be a reduce crime. And I will talk about how it's going to reduce crime and to give proof and all of that. But you end up with many more than 5 paragraphs. You're definitely avoiding first person stuff. So you don't want any first person in this. Again, in drafts, they're rough drafts for a reason. But still, you're going to end up getting rid of all the I, because you don't want to refer to yourself. You don't want to refer to the essay. Like in this essay, I'm going to talk about, like, that's the worst. You want all of that out of there. And you just want to start from basically after, right? Where you say whatever it is you have to say. Okay, so whoops. Okay, so hints, I guess. So your thesis statement, here are things that don't go in it, right? Evidence or quotes or any of those like really specific things don't go in the thesis statements. So here's my example, right? I have so this would be a main thesis statement that I would put at the end of my introduction, which is where the thesis statement goes. Marijuana should be legalized because, and that's important, this word because, and then I list my 3 things. Marijuana has valuable medicinal properties. Legalized marijuana would reduce crime, and selling legalized marijuana will help the economy. Those are my 3 main ideas. So this is a very simplified subject, right? So yours is not likely going to be this easy, but this is sort of the basics for the thesis. And what you're figuring out first is what I was saying, is that you're trying to figure out the main supporting arguments that you're going to make. And then maybe figure out the thesis, but will be up to you. Okay, common problems with the thesis. If it's a fact, statement of fact is not a thesis. That's how you know that. Sometimes people mistake the research question and the thesis. So the thesis, if it's a question, that's wrong, right? It can't be a question. The thesis has to be the answer to the question. So there's that. So, and you're taking a position of some sort. So it's not just a question. Now, here's the real game that everybody struggles with. It's either there's too broad and there's too narrow, right? So the game is to figure out just that sweet spot where you have just enough to talk about and develop without just being surface and abstract, right? So if it's too broad, you're not going to really say anything. And if it's too narrow, you're going to be done in like a page or 3 pages or whatever. So you're really trying to figure out where, what the wording that will let you have a thesis that's right in the right place. Same thing, vague is sort of the same. You can get rid of vague if you figure out that narrow part. Okay, then you're also supposed to do your introduction as part of this assignment. All right, so an effective introduction is basically starting very broad and narrowing till you get to the thesis statement. So what we do now at this level is you're going to want to start with a hook. A hook is a way to grab the reader's attention and make them interested in your subject. You have like 2 sentences before people can decide whether they're going to care about reading the rest or not. So the hook is that. And then you move from you get their attention, and then you move sort of from the general subject to sort of a more narrow version to then your arguments. So you're sort of making this move. Okay, different hooks, right? Using a quotation or a surprising fact. You want someone to be interested. So if you're going to quote somebody, you want them to be relevant in what they're saying, to be sort of startling or shocking, something like that. You can ask a question, but you want to make sure this is a question that you will actually answer in the actual essay, right? So you don't want to just ask a random question to just get someone's attention. You sort of want to ask one that gets their attention, but that you're also going to go on to actually explain. That's my idea. You can tell a story, but not a personal story. So nothing to do with you. You can never use your own personal story in the essay, because it sort of lowers your credibility, which is weird, right? Because it's your personal, real testimony. But the problem is it sort of weakens your argument ability. So find a story. So even if you have some sort of personal story, you can find one that's in an article somewhere, and then you can use that one and tell that and use that as an example, or tell it at the very beginning. You can define a word that's central to your topic. That's sort of overdone sometimes, but what was the last one? Sorry. And then make some sort of comparison. And then one of the comparisons to make is a historical comparison. That's sort of a common thing, right? This is how things used to be. This is where we are now. That could be a hook. So this is just an example. This is the paragraph. I'm not going to read it, but it's basically this idea, right? So the very first one is celebrating the revolution, for instance, in King Louis the 18th, or the 16th, sorry, to the guillotine. Well, like what? Okay, so then it does a little bit more and gets you there. Then it starts to narrow it, right? It's sort of talking about, so this is an example, and you're not sure exactly, is this going to be about history? Is this going to be about France? And then it starts to narrow and brings up the big subject of the death penalty. And you're like, oh, okay, I get the connection to the death penalty. And so then it gets into sort of capital punishment. And then now we have this person who's going to say we should keep it because of these various reasons. So that's sort of the example of a introductory paragraph.